On the day Richard died, I believed the hardest part would be living without him. We had been together 38 years, and every moment of that time was interwoven into my life like threads in a tapestry. But 12 hours after the funeral, I discovered that grief was not the cruelest thing the universe could hand me. Betrayal was, that morning. I had sat in the front pew at his service, wearing the navy dress he always said made my eyes shine. I held my composure like armor while people whispered about how devoted I had been, how tirelessly I had cared for him during his illness. His son Marcus delivered a moving eulogy. His daughter Sarah read a poem. Even his ex-wife Patricia managed some kind words. I received condolences with quiet grace, determined not to collapse in front of them all. The reception afterward was at the house. My house. Though no one seemed to think of it that way. Distant cousins fingered the silver frames on the mantel. Sarah's husband kept prodding me about Richard's business affairs, and Marcus's wife Jennifer made pointed comments about the property's value. But it was Cynthia, my youngest stepson, David's wife, who cut me deepest. From the day she married into the family 3 years ago, she'd made it clear she thought me a parasite. She had watched me all day with her thin little smirk, whispering with Sarah whenever I left the room, calculating like a chess player waiting for her move. When the last guest had gone, I stood at the dishwasher with trembling hands when I heard their footsteps. Cynthia, with David behind her, Sarah and Marcus at her side. "Well, that's over," Cynthia announced. I thanked her for helping, still trying to keep civility intact. But she cut me off sharply. "Drop the act. Alberta, we need to talk about practical matters." Her words were knives. The house, Richard's assets, the business they were making decisions without me. She said I should start looking for somewhere more appropriate. Sarah chimed in, that upkeep here was far too much for me alone. My voice barely escaped as I asked, "Are you telling me to leave?" Cynthia's smile was cruel as she explained that I'd been just there. Not a partner, not a builder, merely a second wife with no stake. Marcus added that Dad would want them to be practical. David, my stepson, whom I had helped raise since he was 12, would not even meet my eyes. They suggested lovely senior communities, as if I were some helpless woman to be stored away. I felt my heart splinter. The grief of losing Richard was nothing compared to the sensation of being erased from my own life. Yet, as Cynthia ordered me to pack my bags, something unexpected bloomed inside me. Not rage, not despair, but a quiet, calculating coldness. "Okay," I said simply. Their faces faltered, unprepared for my compliance. I finished loading the dishwasher and turned my back while they whispered excitedly in the next room, dividing what they thought was theirs. That night, I packed only 2 suitcases, leaving behind jewelry, artwork, clothes, everything Cynthia was already mentally cataloging. Let them think they'd won. The next morning, I checked into a Hampton Inn under my maiden name, Alberta Morrison, anonymous, invisible, exactly what I wanted them to believe. But invisibility was not weakness, it was strategy. My first call was to Harold Steinberg, our attorney of 25 years, though Richard's family never knew he had also been mine. When he arrived, I explained the events of the night before, how I had been dismissed as nothing. His jaw clenched as I spoke. "Do they have any idea about your actual situation?" he asked. "None whatsoever," I replied. "Richard and I had chosen secrecy long ago. He let the world believe he was the sole provider, while the truth was far different." "Are you sure you want to proceed?" Harold asked. I looked out at the parking lot full of ordinary cars, at people with ordinary lives. "I'm sure." Harold explained that everything significant had been transferred to me over a decade ago. Richard's plan to protect me from this very scenario. Within 48 hours, all transfers would be in motion, uncontestable. The house itself, the one from which they had tried to evict me, had been legally mine since 2008. I could throw them out immediately, but I didn't want immediacy. I wanted them to show themselves fully first. That afternoon, I drove past the house. Through tinted windows, I watched Cynthia directing movers like a general, bringing in her own furniture as though staking permanent claim. I received a text from David wishing me well in finding a nice place, as if he were sending a discarded aunt to a retirement home. They had no idea that the documents proving my ownership sat in a safety deposit box downtown, along with deeds, certificates, and titles worth more than they could imagine. They thought Richard's modest consulting firm was our livelihood. They had no clue about the apartment complexes in Manhattan, the office buildings in Boston, or the warehouse in Soho now valued at $28 million that I had transformed into luxury lofts. At the bank, my advisor Margaret Chen read Harold's paperwork, her eyes widening as she absorbed the scope. "Mrs. Morrison, I had no idea you were managing such substantial assets," she whispered. "Privacy was important," I replied. "But circumstances have changed." Transfers began immediately. That evening, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Cynthia. Her tone was uneasy. "We found some confusing paperwork in Richard's office. Could you call me back?" I deleted it. Let them twist. For 3 days. I ignored their increasingly frantic messages. I spent my mornings making calls from the hotel's business center, speaking to property managers, investment advisors, architects. The world they thought they had claimed was a world they had never owned. By Friday, Harold called with news that made me smile for the first time since the funeral. "They've hired an attorney," he said. "They want a formal reading of the will. Monday at 2:00 p.m. Perfect." That weekend, I shopped. Not discount widow's clothes, but the navy suit of a woman of substance, paired with pearls and Richard's anniversary watch. On Sunday, I moved from the Hampton Inn into the Fairmont penthouse. A reminder to myself of exactly who I was. On Monday afternoon, I walked into that law office ready to stop being invisible. The law office was buzzing with quiet tension when I arrived. The receptionist glanced at me like I was just another grieving widow. One more inconvenience in a day full of paperwork. But I was early, deliberately so, to watch them before the show began. From down the hall, I could hear Cynthia's voice, sharp and indignant, questioning why I even needed to be present. "She's not a real beneficiary," she snapped, unaware that her words carried. Their attorney's reply was patient but firm. "The law requires all named parties to be present. As Richard's spouse, she has legal standing." I sat in the waiting area, hands folded neatly in my lap, the picture of calm obedience to anyone looking. I was the aging widow waiting nervously for scraps from her husband's estate. That illusion suited me. When Harold arrived, he greeted me with the same cool professionalism he always did. At his side was Catherine Walsh, a lawyer whose reputation was as sharp as her gaze. She would represent my interests today, though the truth was, she and Harold had already built an unshakable fortress around me years ago. Finally, we were ushered into the conference room. The family had arrayed themselves like soldiers preparing for battle, Cynthia at the head of their side of the table, David beside her, Sarah and Marcus flanking them. Their suits and stiff postures shouted entitlement. They looked powerful, but I could see the strain in their eyes, the barely suppressed desperation. The reading of the will began. Jackson Morrison droning in monotone through the legal preamble. He reached the section on bequests, and I watched their faces carefully. To my beloved children, Marcus, Sarah, and David, I leave the sum of $50,000 each. Their reactions were everything I had anticipated. Sarah frowned. Marcus sat up sharply, and Cynthia's lips thinned to a knife-edge line. Then came the line that landed like a hammer. And to my dear wife, Alberta Morrison Holloway, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all properties, investments, and business interests, to be hers absolutely and without restriction. The silence that followed was exquisite. Cynthia leaned forward, eyes flashing, and demanded a repeat. Sarah stammered about what the remainder included. Catherine's voice was crisp as she explained every house, every account, every business asset, all of it, legally and irrevocably mine. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered. Cynthia, her composure cracking, spat out the words that had defined her contempt from the beginning. She was just there. She never contributed anything. She lived off his success. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of 3 decades settle into this one moment. My voice was quiet, but every word was edged with steel. "You're right, Cynthia. I didn't contribute to Richard's consulting firm or his modest investments. That was all his." I paused, watching confusion ripple across their faces. But Richard's estate isn't what you think it is, and I am not who you think I am. Catherine slid the first folder across the table with a deliberate, surgical grace. "This is the deed to the property you've been living in since Mrs. Morrison graciously left. The house you call home." Cynthia picked it up, her hands trembling. When she saw my name as sole owner, her face drained of color. "That can't be right," Sarah whispered, grabbing at the paper. Harold leaned forward. "It's correct. Richard refinanced in 2007 using Alberta's capital. Ownership transferred to her then." "What capital?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising. "She never had any money." "Oh, but she did," Catherine replied, sliding over the next set of documents. "Morrison Holdings, LLC. My company, my properties, my empire, built quietly over decades while Richard was the public face. Apartment complexes in Manhattan, office buildings in Boston. The converted warehouse in Soho valued at $28 million. The room cracked like glass under pressure. Sarah's breath hitched. Marcus slumped back in disbelief. And David finally spoke, his voice almost childlike. "So when Cynthia threw you out, you were being evicted from your own house." "Exactly," I said softly. "And when she called me a parasite, she was insulting the person who had been paying the mortgage, the taxes, the bills, all of it for years." Cynthia's voice was a whisper now, stripped of its former venom. You let us think." "I let you show me who you were," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut the silence. "I gave you every chance to treat me with kindness and dignity. You chose cruelty instead." Catherine pulled out a summary sheet, her tone brisk and merciless. "The total value of Mrs. Morrison's holdings is approximately $47 million, excluding the modest assets from Mr. Holloway's estate. Legally, you inherit exactly what the will specifies, $50,000 each. As for your current occupancy of Mrs. Morrison's property, that makes you trespassers." The word landed like a gunshot. Cynthia's mask cracked fully then, fury and terror flickering in her eyes. I picked up my purse and stood. "You have 72 hours to remove your belongings from my house. After that, I'll have you legally evicted." The room froze, and for the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt the weight of grief lift. They had thought me powerless, a burden to discard. They had forgotten that invisibility was not weakness. It was strategy. I left them sitting in stunned silence, their illusions shattered, their entitlement exposed for the hollow thing it had always been. Behind me, Cynthia's desperate voice called out, "We're family, Alberta. Please." I paused at the doorway, my hand on the handle. "Yes," I said quietly, "and you've just shown me exactly what family means to you." Then I walked out, knowing the real reckoning had only just begun. The 72 hours I granted them became the most revealing 3 days of my life. I had expected defiance, perhaps even legal maneuvers to stall the inevitable. But what unfolded was far more satisfying. Not because I delighted in their suffering, I am not cruel by nature, but because, for the first time in decades, I saw people forced to confront the consequences of their own choices without the cushion of Richard's protection or the illusion of unearned security. The first call came within hours of that will reading. "Cynthia." "Of course." Her voice was an uneasy blend of rage and desperation. "Alberta, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. We can work something out reasonably." Reasonably? The word dripped with irony. "Like when you threw me out of my own home the night my husband died," I asked evenly. Silence crackled on the line. Then, weakly, "We were grieving too. We weren't thinking clearly. You were clear enough to pack my bags and divide what you thought was your inheritance." I reminded her before ending the call. That would be the last time I allowed Cynthia's voice into my life directly. The next morning, David arrived unannounced at my hotel, against my better judgment. I agreed to see him in the lobby. He sat across from me, a man of 35 reduced to a boy wringing his hands. "Alberta." "I'm sorry," he blurted, eyes downcast. "Cynthia went too far. I should have stopped her." "Should have," I echoed. "But you didn't." He shifted uncomfortably, trying to explain, to paint himself as a victim of his wife's domineering ways. I let him speak until his excuses ran out. Then I cut through them with a single truth. When she humiliated me, you stood there. You said nothing. That silence was your choice, David. And now you live with the consequences. His face flushed crimson. "I regret it." I studied him for a long moment. He wasn't malicious. Not like Cynthia, but weak. Weakness can wound as deeply as cruelty, especially when it hides behind loyalty to the wrong people. "You have until tomorrow evening to leave my house," I told him firmly. "After that, the locks change, and then you figure out how to live without leaning on money that was never yours to begin with." David swallowed hard, tears glinting in his eyes. "Cynthia won't survive this." "No," I said quietly. "She'll learn from it. Or she won't. That's no longer my concern." By Friday evening, curiosity pushed me back to the house to see whether they had honored my deadline. The driveway was packed with cars, Marcus's truck, Sarah's sedan, even 2 vehicles I didn't recognize. When I stepped inside, uninvited, the room fell silent. They had gathered like a council of war, with Cynthia in Richard's favorite chair, Sarah and Marcus on either side, and David hovering miserably by the window. The 2 unfamiliar faces turned out to be Cynthia's parents, Tom and Linda Patterson, reinforcements, I realized, drafted into her campaign of entitlement. "Alberta," Cynthia began, standing with forced dignity. "We were hoping to reach a reasonable settlement." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "The house. Obviously, David and I have put work into it. Improvements. We think we deserve compensation." A laugh bubbled up in me, dry and sharp. "Compensation for living rent-free in my house for a week." The Pattersons shifted uncomfortably. Linda cleared her throat. "Cynthia told us there was confusion about Richard's will. That things were unclear. There's no confusion, I said calmly. Richard left modest sums to his children and everything else to me. What you assumed was Richard's property was mine long before he died. Their faces showed dawning comprehension, and I knew then that Cynthia had spun them her self-serving tale, but the truth was simpler and sharper. Your daughter evicted me from my own house the night of my husband's funeral. I continued. She called me a leech, a bloodsucker, while sitting in a home I paid for, surrounded by comforts my investments provided. Linda's expression hardened with maternal disappointment. Cynthia Marie Patterson, she said in a tone that froze the room. Tell me you didn't do what she's saying. Mom, it's complicated. It's not complicated, Tom snapped, his face red. It's shameful. We raised you better. He turned to me, voice heavy with regret. Mrs. Morrison, I can't undo what my daughter has done, but I can apologize. I inclined my head. Their shame was punishment enough. The final pillar of Cynthia's support crumbled that evening as her parents walked out in silence, unwilling to defend her cruelty. After that, the exodus was swift. Marcus and Sarah packed without meeting my eyes. David moved like a man trapped in a fog of regret. Only Cynthia lingered, rooted in the middle of the room, her glare venomous. This isn't over, she hissed. Yes, it is, I said, voice steady. By the time I changed the locks that night, the house was mine again, not just legally, but spiritually. The weight of their contempt had been purged from its walls. For the first time since Richard's passing, I could walk through those rooms and feel not grief, but freedom. And yet, freedom is never final. It's a beginning. 6 months later, I was in my garden when the phone rang. Mercy General Hospital. David had listed me, the woman he had failed as his emergency contact, against reason, against caution. I went. 6 months had passed since that night I reclaimed my home. 6 months of silence broken only by the occasional rumor drifting through town about Richard's children. Marcus had struggled with debts. Sarah had retreated into her teaching job. And Cynthia, well, Cynthia's name came up most often, always attached to bitterness and decline. I had built myself a life of peace. My roses bloomed, my investments thrived, and my evenings were my own. I thought I was finished with all of them. Then the hospital called. Mrs. Morrison, this is Dr. Chen at Mercy General. We have a patient who listed you as emergency contact, David Holloway. The name hit me like cold water. What happened? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Car accident. He's stable. He asked for you specifically. 20 minutes later, I was walking through sterile corridors, heels clicking against polished tile. My blue dress felt too formal, my pearl earrings too bright under the fluorescent lights, but I wore them anyway. Strength, I reminded myself, had its uniform. David was pale but alive, his left leg in a cast, his arm in a sling. When he saw me, his eyes softened with relief. You came, he whispered. Of course I came, I said. You're hurt. He tried to sit up straighter, grimacing with pain. They couldn't reach Cynthia. Her phone's disconnected. I was not surprised. Word around town had been clear their marriage had collapsed in the months since the will reading. She had taken what little savings remained and fled back to her parents. David was alone now, not only physically, but in every sense. I'm sorry, David, I said softly. His gaze fixed on me, searching, desperate. Are you after everything we did? The question struck deeper than I expected. 6 months ago, I would have said no without hesitation, but seeing him now broken, stripped of Cynthia's influence, humbled, something inside me shifted. Yes, I admitted. I am sorry you're going through this. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I need to tell you something about that night. When Cynthia threw you out, I knew it was wrong. Even then, I knew. But I was so angry about the will, so disappointed that Dad left us so little, that I let her convince me you were the problem. Tears welled in his eyes. You raised me, Alberta, from 12 years old. You were more of a mother than my own ever was. And that night, instead of protecting you, I let my wife humiliate you. I've been living with that guilt every day since. I felt my own throat tighten. The boy I had nursed through fevers and coached through heartbreak was still there beneath the wreckage. I reached out and took his hand, scarred now by his own mistakes. You didn't throw me away, David, I said gently. You made a terrible mistake, but not an unforgivable one. His grip tightened, desperate. How can you say that after what we did? Because I understand something now, I replied. That night, I thought I was losing everything: my home, my family, my life. But what I really lost was an illusion. I believed I was part of a family built on love. The truth was, my place was conditional based on what I could provide. You didn't know me. Not really. None of you did. You loved the role I played, not the person I was. David bowed his head, ashamed. But now, I continued, you're seeing me for the first time as a complete person. And I'm seeing you too. Not as Richard's son or Cynthia's husband, but as the boy I helped raise. Now a man learning to face his own consequences. Where does that leave us? He asked, voice raw. I thought carefully before answering. It leaves us here, David, starting over, if you truly want to. But this time, no illusions. I won't be invisible. I won't pretend to be less than I am. If we build a relationship again, it has to be based on truth and respect. Fresh tears streaked his face, but for the first time, his expression held determination. I want that, Alberta. I want to know you, the real you. For the first time in years, I believed him. As I stood to leave, he whispered, what about Marcus and Sarah? Do you think that's up to them? I said. My door is open, but they'll have to walk through it themselves. As for Cynthia, I hesitated, then shook my head. Some choices burn bridges forever. She made hers. When I left the hospital that evening, the air outside felt lighter, almost forgiving. My phone buzzed with missed calls from Marcus and Sarah, hesitant voices on the voicemails, tentative apologies, requests to talk. I didn't answer. Not yet. Forgiveness, like trust, is earned slowly. I walked into my garden at sunset, the roses glowing pink in the last light. My life, for the first time in decades, was entirely my own. I had the freedom to choose distance or connection, solitude or family, and that freedom, I realized, was worth far more than $47 million. The days after David's accident unfolded with a strange quiet. For years, my life had been defined by other people's demands: Richard's illness, the children's expectations, Cynthia's contempt. Now, even as old wounds reopened, I felt something new settling into me: control, choice, the power to decide who I let back into my world and on what terms. David was discharged 2 weeks later. I visited him once, in his tiny studio downtown. It was modest, barely furnished, but it was his, for the first time. I saw him trying to build a life without leaning on someone else's resources. He looked fragile, but also freer, like a man finally stripped of illusions. Independence suits you, I told him as I left. He smiled weakly, but his eyes carried gratitude. Marcus and Sarah were slower to reach out. At first, their messages were awkward, full of stilted apologies and half-excuses, but gradually, their tone softened. They didn't ask for money, didn't demand reconciliation. They asked for something simpler, a chance to talk. I waited weeks before I agreed, meeting them in a cafe where no one could pretend we were still a family untouched by betrayal. Marcus spoke first, his voice heavy with shame. We let Cynthia lead us. We wanted to believe Dad had left us secure, and when that wasn't true, we looked for someone to blame. You were the easy target. And you didn't stop her, I said plainly. No, Sarah whispered, eyes downcast. We didn't. And we regret it every day. For a long time, I said nothing. Letting them twist in their discomfort felt like justice. But finally, I sighed. Regret means little without change. If you want something with me, you'll have to build it slowly. No assumptions, no entitlement. Just honesty. They both nodded, relief visible on their faces. I didn't forgive them then. Not fully. But I opened a door. What they did with it was their choice. Cynthia, however, remained silent. Word spread that her marriage to David had collapsed completely. She had returned to her parents' home, her reputation tarnished, her arrogance shattered. She never contacted me. Perhaps she couldn't bear to. Perhaps she believed she still had nothing to apologize for. Either way, she was a chapter I had closed. Life moved forward. My roses bloomed brighter that summer, and the house felt lighter without the shadow of resentment clinging to its walls. I traveled to New York to check on my buildings, met with architects in Boston about a new renovation, and spent evenings on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky turn violet at dusk. For the first time, I wasn't living for Richard, or for his children, or for anyone's expectations. I was living for myself. One evening, months after it all, David came to visit. He walked with a slight limp, but there was strength in him I hadn't seen before. He brought no excuses, no requests, just himself. We sat in the garden, the scent of roses in the air, and he said, I don't expect forgiveness. Alberta, I just want the chance to know you now, as you are. And I realized then that this quiet honesty was what family was supposed to be. Not entitlement, not manipulation, not conditions tied to money or property, just showing up, flawed but willing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a peace settle over me. The battles were behind me. The lessons remained. I had lost Richard, but in that loss, I had found something else: clarity. People will show you who they are when they think you are powerless. Some will betray you, some will abandon you, and some, eventually, will surprise you by finding the strength to change. What mattered was not the money, not even the $47 million that had once seemed like the heart of the story. What mattered was the freedom to choose who to forgive, who to keep close, and who to let go. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never underestimate your own worth, and never allow others to define your place. Family is not just blood, or law, or obligation. Family is who shows up when the illusions fall away. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences.